All right, so let's jump into Shakespeare today.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at Romeo and Juliet,
Okay.
and specifically Juliet.
Cool.
For anyone studying this, for AQA GCSE,
Yeah.
it's a great character to kind of get under the skin of.
Really interesting one.
And we all know Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy.
Of course, yeah.
And Juliet, one of the main characters, is only 13 years old when this is all happening.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Do you imagine dealing with love
Yeah.
and marriage
Or especially
and feuding families?
in that time.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, even now it would be a lot to deal
Yeah.
with at 13.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is how Juliet challenges what was expected of women in Elizabethan society.
Okay.
So she's witty and intelligent.
So she's not just sitting around waiting for things to happen.
No, not at all.
Got it.
Yeah.
So how does Shakespeare show us this then?
Well, one of the most powerful examples is when she says to Romeo, "Deny thy father and refuse thy name." She's basically saying, screw the rules, I'm choosing love.
Wow.
That's a pretty bold statement, especially for a young woman
At that time.
in that era.
Absolutely.
And when you think about how women were often seen as property at that time,
Yeah.
her demanding agency like that,
It's a big deal.
it is a really big deal, yeah. And Shakespeare even does something interesting with the form of the play as well.
Okay.
He has Juliet participate in constructing sonnets with Romeo,
Right.
which were traditionally a very male-dominated form of poetry.
Interesting.
So by giving her a voice in this way, he kind of elevates her character.
It's like he's subtly giving her power.
Yeah.
Through the language itself.
Absolutely.
That's really cool.
And yeah, so you've got this strong-willed young woman kind of going up against societal norms.
Yeah, but then there's this whole love at first sight thing with Romeo and the feud between the families as well.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Talk about a recipe for disaster.
So you've got these powerful external forces acting on her.
Yeah.
You know, this passionate love and then this raging family feud.
Right.
And then also this sense of fate hanging over everything.
Almost like it's inevitable.
Yeah. But internally, Juliet is also grappling with this idea of liminality. Yeah. So basically being stuck between childhood and adulthood.
Okay.
She's not a child anymore.
Right.
But she's not fully considered an adult in her society either.
I see.
Yeah.
And how does that manifest?
Well, think about her relationships.
Okay.
She's expected to obey her parents, but she's also developing her own desires and opinions.
Right.
So she's torn between following the rules and forging her own path.
Got it.
And this internal conflict is a huge part of what makes her such a compelling character.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Right.
She's being pulled in all these different directions.
Totally.
Internally and externally. No wonder she says things like, "My grave is like to be my wedding bed."
It's such a great quote.
Talk about foreshadowing.
Yeah. Right. It's a chilling line that highlights how love and death are kind of intertwined in the play.
Yeah. And Shakespeare's definitely setting the stage for tragedy right from the get-go.
And it's incredible how he weaves these themes together through Juliet's words and actions.
It's like he's dropping these little hints all over the place. And it's up to us to put them together.
Exactly.
So we've touched on her relationship with Romeo a bit.
A little bit.
But what about the other important relationships in Juliet's life?
Yeah.
I mean, there's her dad, Lord Capulet.
Yeah.
Her mom, Lady Capulet. And, of course, the nurse.
The nurse.
How do these relationships impact her journey?
They're essential. I mean, Lord Capulet, for example, starts off seeming quite loving and indulgent.
Yeah.
But his true colors come out when Juliet defies him.
Okay.
He becomes controlling.
Really?
And even tyrannical.
It's like he's trying to remind her who's in charge.
Absolutely.
It's such a stark contrast to that relaxed relationship.
It is.
They seem to have at the beginning of the play.
Exactly. And it kind of reflects this key point about Elizabethan society.
Go on.
That men held the power.
Right.
And women were expected to submit.
So even though Juliet is this strong-willed character, she's still operating within a system that limits her choices.
That's the tension, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's really important. It highlights the societal pressures she's facing and makes her acts of rebellion even more significant.
I see.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Right. Yeah, and her relationship with her mother, Lady Capulet, is a completely different story.
Yeah, it's almost like they're strangers.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how much genuine love and support
Exactly.
Juliet's actually getting from her own family.
Yeah, and that's where the nurse comes in.
Okay.
She's been Juliet's primary caregiver since infancy.
Right.
So she acts as a confidant and a source of comfort.
Yeah, okay.
And their bond is much closer than Juliet's relationship.
Yeah, I could see that.
With her mother.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how Shakespeare creates these contrasting dynamics within the family.
Yeah.
Highlighting all the different ways that women can experience love and support.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and speaking of the nurse, her role kind of evolved throughout the play.
Right.
Initially, she's fully supportive of Juliet's relationship with Romeo.
Right.
Even helping them get married. In secret.
But then, of course, things get a bit more complicated.
Yeah, a bit.
When Romeo kills Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, the nurse's perspective starts to shift.
Yeah, she becomes more cautious. She advises Juliet to forget about Romeo and just marry Paris instead.
It's probably a practical suggestion.
It is.
But it's also a massive betrayal.
Definitely.
Of the trust they once shared.
Big time.
And that must be devastating for Juliet.
Absolutely. I mean,
who's already dealing with so much.
This is where we see Juliet really stepping into her own.
Right.
She realizes she can no longer rely on others.
Okay.
And she has to make her own decisions.
Yeah.
Even if it means going against everyone else's advice.
That's pretty impressive for a 13-year-old.
It really is.
Okay, so we've talked about the major relationships in Juliet's life. But let's zoom in on some of those key quotes that really reveal her character.
Sure.
I mean, her lines are iconic.
Of course, yeah.
For a reason, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we could spend hours analyzing them, but let's focus on a few that really stand out.
Right.
So, for example,
go on.
In the famous balcony scene, Juliet asks, "Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?"
The classic line.
Yeah.
But it's not just about his name, is it?
Not at all. She's actually questioning why their families have to be enemies.
So she's seeing beyond the feud.
She is.
Even if it seems impossible.
Yeah, and there's this real sense of hope and idealism.
Okay.
In her words, you know, like this belief that love can conquer all.
Right.
Even though the reality is much more complicated.
Yeah, for sure.
And that complexity is reflected in other parts of the play as well.
Okay.
Like when she says, "My bounty is as boundless as the sea. My love is deep."
Right.
It's like this incredibly passionate declaration.
It is.
But it's also laced with a sense of foreboding.
Yeah, she's acknowledging the intensity of her feelings, but there's also this underlying awareness that it might not work out.
It might be too powerful, too overwhelming to survive.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's that line about her grave being her wedding bed.
Right. Talk about foreshadowing.
It's a chilling image that speaks to those intertwined themes of love and death. Throughout the play.
Yeah, and it highlights Juliet's growing understanding that their relationship is marked by danger. Yeah, and that happiness may be fleeting.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how Shakespeare uses language to create that sense of anticipation and dread.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've got these grand declarations of love.
Yeah.
But what about Juliet's more practical side?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she's not just a love-struck teenager.
Not at all.
She's incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
And resourceful.
She is.
So how does Shakespeare...
Well, one of the best examples of that is in her interactions with Paris, the man her father wants her to marry.
Right.
Shakespeare uses a technique called sticomythia.
Sticomythia?
Yeah, which is basically a rapid-fire exchange of dialogue.
Right.
To show Juliet's wit and evasiveness.
Yeah, those quick, sharp lines when she's deflecting his advances without being outright rude.
Exactly, like a verbal fencing match.
Yeah.
And Juliet definitely knows how to parry.
Yeah. And it speaks to her intelligence.
It does.
And her maturity.
Yeah.
Which are often overlooked because of her age.
Yeah, and it's like Shakespeare's reminding us that she's not just this passive character being swept along by events. She's actively thinking and strategizing.
Okay.
Yeah, even in these really challenging situations.
Right.
And then, of course, there's that incredibly powerful scene where she confronts her father about his demand that she marry Paris.
Right.
She flat out refuses.
Wow.
Even knowing the potential consequences.
It's a pivotal moment.
It is.
In the play.
Yeah.
Where she finally breaks free from these constraints of obedience.
Yeah.
And asserts her own will.
Totally.
And the language she uses is so powerful.
It is.
She says, I will not marry yet, and when I do, I swear it shall be Romeo, whom, I hate rather than Paris.
It's an incredible line.
It's so defiant.
Yeah.
Shows how far she's come.
Yeah.
From that obedient daughter.
Excellent.
We met at the beginning.
It's like she's drawing a line in the sand.
Yeah.
Declaring her independence.
Right.
And her unwavering love for Romeo.
Yeah.
And this act of defiance has huge consequences. It propels the play towards its tragic climax.
It's heartbreaking to see how her courage and determination
it is
ultimately lead to such devastating outcomes.
It really is. And that complexity is part of what makes Juliet's character so fascinating.
So we've talked a lot about Juliet's strength and defiance. But what about her vulnerability?
Okay.
I mean, she's still a young girl.
Yeah.
Facing incredibly difficult choices.
She is.
How does Shakespeare
That's a good question.
convey that?
One of the most poignant examples is when she's alone in her chamber, contemplating Friar Lawrence's plan.
Right.
She expresses her fears and anxieties,
Okay.
acknowledging all the risks involved,
Right.
and taking the potion that will make her appear dead.
It's a really powerful moment.
It is.
And it reminds us that beneath her strength and determination, she's still a young woman.
For sure.
Grappling with uncertainty and fear.
Yeah. And the language she uses reflects that vulnerability.
Right.
She says, what if it be a poison which the friar subtly hath ministered to have me dead?
Right.
She's voicing those doubts, that are swirling in her mind. And it makes her actions even more courageous because she chooses to move forward, despite her fear.
That's a great point.
It's like her vulnerability actually underscores her bravery.
Yeah.
Because she's not acting out of recklessness, but out of this deep-seated love and this determination to be with Romeo, even if it means facing her deepest fears.
Yeah.
And this complexity, this blend of strength and vulnerability is a key part of what makes Juliet such a compelling and enduring character.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's this complexity that kind of leads us to the play's tragic climax.
Right.
So Juliet, believing that Romeo is dead, takes her own life.
It's such a powerful and heartbreaking moment.
It is.
And it's interesting how Shakespeare subverts expectations here.
Okay.
Because throughout the play, Juliet has been denied agency by her family and society.
Yeah.
But in this final act, she takes control.
Exactly. She makes a choice.
Right.
A drastic one.
Yeah.
But it's a choice nonetheless.
And in Elizabethan England, suicide was considered a truly shocking
and
transgressive act.
Especially for a woman.
So she's not just choosing death, she's choosing to defy the world that's tried to control her.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
And it raises some complex questions about the nature of Juliet's suicide.
It does.
Is it an act of despair?
Yeah.
A defiant rebellion against fate?
Possible.
And societal constraints, or
a bit of both?
A bit of both. Yeah. I remember when I first read the play, I was really struck by how Juliet talks about the dagger before she takes her own life. She calls it happy dagger. This is thy sheath.
Yeah.
It's such a chilling image.
It is.
But it also reveals something important about her state of mind at that point, doesn't it?
It does. On the surface, it seems like she's embracing death as a welcome release from her pain.
Right.
But it's also important to remember that in Shakespeare's time, daggers were often associated with masculinity and power.
Right.
So by taking up the dagger, she's also taking on this traditionally male role.
Okay.
Further challenging those societal norms.
So she's reclaiming her agency even in death.
Yeah. It's a powerful way to look at it.
And even though it's a tragic ending, it's hard not to admire her strength and determination.
I agree.
To stay true to her love for Romeo.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting that Juliet's death, along with Romeo's, has a profound impact on the other characters as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It forces those feuding families to finally confront the senselessness of their hatred.
Yeah, it's like their deaths become a catalyst for change. Breaking that cycle of violence that has plagued Verona for so long.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes Romeo and Juliet such a timeless and relevant story.
Right.
It speaks to the destructive power of prejudice and this urgent need for reconciliation and understanding.
It's a message that resonates just as strongly today
for sure
as it did in Shakespeare's time.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that Juliet's journey, while tragically short, is a testament to the enduring power of love.
Yeah.
The struggle for individual agency and the impact that even one person can have on the world around them.
It's definitely a story that stays with you long after you finished reading it.
It does.
And it makes you think about the choices we make.
Yeah.
The forces that shape our lives.
For sure.
And the consequences of our actions.
Well said.
So if you are studying Romeo and Juliet for your GCSEs, keep in mind all the things that we've discussed today.
Absolutely.
Pay attention to how Shakespeare uses language, imagery, character development to create this really powerful and enduring story.
And think about the complexities of Juliet's character.
Yeah.
Her motivations and the challenges that she faces.
For sure.
And most importantly, don't be afraid to kind of delve into the deeper meanings and themes that lie beneath the surface of the text.
I think that's great advice.
Have fun with it.
And remember, even though Shakespeare can seem daunting at first, there's so much to discover.
There is.
And enjoy in his work.
Absolutely.
So we hope you enjoyed this deep dive.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Into Romeo and Juliet.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.